Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Rihla Initiative panel series organized by the Policy Center for the New South, the Imal Initiative for Climate and Development, and the Bourse and Bazaar Foundation under the theme Gulf Investment in Green Economic Growth across the Middle East and North Africa. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Karim Al-Inawi, Executive President of the Policy Center for the New South, for the introductory remarks. Dr. Karim Al-Inawi, the floor is yours.
C'est en ligne ça ou pas? Hein? C'est en ligne ou la Rébi maintenant? C'est en ligne? Quelle erreur. Je vais rien pouvoir vous dire. Alors, we need to speak in English? In English? Oh, okay. All right. First of all, let me welcome you, all of you, and our partners, actually Mehran and Iskander, for reaching out for us, and all of you for being here. So you'll tell me who you are, because I see young faces, but less young faces as well, so to understand a little bit the mixture. But we're very glad at the Policy Center, because it's also, this stems for us from what we do with young leaders from our program. So, you know, it creates networks, creates friends, and we're very glad when it happens, like in this case, that we've got to know you, the promoters of these initiatives, through our our program. And that's exactly what we want to achieve. I think the team and, you know, Fadila and their colleagues are very keen on sort of having this kind of you know, of partnerships. So don't hesitate for others. You don't have to be an Adele, by the way. That's but I think don't hesitate to sort of come up with initiatives and things where you want us to sort of, if we can help. That's exactly what we want to do with this program. I mean, now it's 70 nationalities, I think, more than 400 alumni all around the world, you know, from all continents, particularly of course from the Atlantic continent. So I think that's the first message I want to convey to you. We have sort of, for the youngest here in the room, there are like 7 ways to engage with us. And we've, I guess they're much clearer on our website now. So ranging from internship, volunteership, of course, young professional programs, or working with the Policy Center. There's an array of sort of a way to connect and do things with us. And we're doing more and more also within Morocco with networks of younger colleagues, you know, that's sort of right after high school all the way to university. So you're more than welcome to reach out to the team to come up with initiatives. I think that's so. Today it's about investment plus money. Well, money is not enough. You need money and ideas, talent a little bit, will, and it's for the public policy to make it competitive as well. So you will be talking about green, and so particularly a sector that has difficulties to reform itself, which is, and I'm going to be killed by some for that, but oil and gas. I think that change is difficult. There are incentives given by governments all around the world, including in Morocco, with sort of fiscal frameworks that are sort of encouraging this kind of investment. But I think, I'm not a specialist, but to, you know, I often get to talk to colleagues, and we have also our experts here. The issue is, of course, technology, but it's also cost at entry, There are governments all over the sectors. In the end, they're kind of in between demand and the supply. So I don't think we've cracked the code of sort of a massive, for a massive sort of investment in the sector all across the region. And I think it's true for all over all regions. And there's also instability in the policy frameworks in many countries. So we're seeing it in some sectors such as automobile, but also in the US with the policies, vis-à-vis sort of the renewables. So we're not doing very good on climate, as you all know, of course. So I think you picked a great topic. There are a few questions I'm sort of ask you. So how to make this happen at scale beyond government support? Because most of the actors, they're spending a lot of time trying to get sort of subsidies, offtakes. So is it an issue that it lacks, we need to open more to attract capital from outside of that sector? So, capital moves. So, but there's something there that's unsatisfactory, I would say, in the region at large. Of course, there are many legacy companies that want a slow change for a transition. But as we know, when we have the choice, human beings, we don't want to change, no? Huh? العام زين بخير وعلى خير مالنا لا القرع نشطو له راسو خلي داك الجنان الراقد ولا تبرزتو تجيب على راسك الصداع. There's a bit of that in the psyche of public policies. So I think this is a good question for you guys that are experts. So there are, of course, technology issue, hydrogen and others. I think that's not yet very clear. There are guarantees that have been asked by the private sector to invest. I'm not sure governments should play that game completely, partially, but it's very difficult to get out of subsidies when they're put in place. There's an economies of subsidies and rents that creates immediately, so we do be very careful. In public policies, there are, hell is paved with good intentions, and we have, it's something we study a lot here, is the unintended consequences of good intentions. A very old problem in social science, but I think that remains very true. So navigating between all that, what can you suggest? And maybe the last point would be in terms of what can we do together? You picked the MENA region, but what can we do together as a region, but also with Africa and our neighbors in Europe? Why it's not happening, really? I'm sure you have some ideas why you can. The response, I think, if it is to be at scale, will have to be at least at a regional level, but at best would be sort of organizing common markets, be it with our neighbors in Europe, or more generally in North Africa and in the MENA region, but also on the continent. So, okay. Anyway, we will continue. You will continue to work, no? Still, okay. So Sabrina and Rim, I think Rim is not here. She's here. Ah, okay. Vous êtes pas fâché au moins? Okay. So I'm sure you met them. They're our expert, and also, of course, Fadila, Majda, and her team. Please do reach out to us. Sometimes we're not necessarily, proactive, but doesn't mean that we're not reactive. So don't hesitate to ping us. Sometimes we tend to sort of get into our sort of comfort as a think tank, but we're very, really for us it's refreshing, it's important to get in touch with communities like you guys, Mehran and Iskander are sort of, putting together. So once again, welcome, and looking forward to see you soon. Thank you.
And now, please join me in welcoming Mr. Iskander Erzini-Vernois, co-founder and director of the EMAL Initiative for Climate and Development. Mr. Erzini-Vernois, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, colleagues. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Welcome to the wonderful premises of PCNS. It's always a pleasure to work with Sila Ainaoui and all the PCNS team. Of course, these are, I think, you couldn't find finer facilities if you went and toured the Gulf or indeed any premier academic institution anywhere in the world. Thanks also to colleagues from the Bourse and Bazaar Foundation, who are the driving force and impetus for the reason why we're here today. So to Mehran and to colleagues. And thank you also, I should say, to my own colleagues, including, I think, Fatima and Salma, who are not here, but who helped to make this event possible. Of course, this was very much a collaborative event, and I think essential contributions from all sides. So today we'll be discussing the topic of Gulf investment in green development, green economic growth, essentially, in the Middle East and North Africa region. It's a broad topic. We had earlier today an in-depth roundtable where we got the chance to trade thoughts on many of the thematics at hand. Of course, it's a time, as we all know, of great challenges for the region, which faces not just economic challenges, but also conflict, challenges to international law, and of course, a great many difficulties. But having said that, I think we're today taking an opportunity to think in positive terms, to think about the future that might be attained if we were, as Sila Ainaoui said, working together to be greater than the sum of our parts. This event, it should be noted, is part of a series of events, this Rihla initiative series. Interestingly, this is the first event from that series that's happening outside the Gulf region. I think it's very appropriate that it's happening here in Morocco. Of course, the Rihla series, and I'm sure Mehran will be talking about this shortly, is named after, as many of you may know, the famous Moroccan traveler Ibn Battuta. I have my copy, actually, of his Rihla back in my hometown, Tanja, which is also Tangier, the hometown of Ibn Battuta. So you can all go there and visit his grave. But yeah, I think it's of a symbolic significance because Ibn Battuta, while he was not strictly speaking an Arab, he was a North African, I guess, by ethnic background. He was part of a larger political consciousness, cultural entity, linguistic, religious continuity of the Arab world and the Islamic world. And I think that that sort of commonality that brings us together, I think makes it perfect sense that when we talk about the Gulf cooperation and Gulf investment, that North Africa, the Arab region, would be the first port of call, and that this is an appropriate place to begin this conversation. And obviously, the conversation will continue in other parts of the world, and we're looking forward to watching how that goes. So I think we have a number of two good panels lined up. Yeah, I think without further ado, I'll look forward to passing the floor to Mehran, who'll be moderating our first panel. And my hope is that we leave here today with a clearer sense of where the opportunities lie for scaling the already significant Gulf investment in climate-related sectors in the MENA region. And if we can identify, what are the levers of change that we collectively can look to pull to scale this agenda, because as was said previously, we are falling short of the economic opportunities that exist, of the investment potential that is there, and indeed of the cooperation opportunity to be greater than the sum of our parts, leveraging our respective opportunities and areas of potential across human capital, financial capital. We have different strengths as a region, but working together, I think we have a great opportunity to seize one of the great economic growth stories of the 21st century, which is, of course, the clean energy economy. So thank you, and over to you, Mehran.
We now welcome Dr. Mehran Hagirian, Director of Research and Programs, Bourse and Bazaar Foundation. Dr. Mehran Hagirian, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Karim and Iskandar, for your remarks. I really appreciate it. On behalf of the Bourse and Bazaar Foundation and the Rihla Initiative for Green Economic Growth, I'm very happy to be here in Rabat moderating the second edition of the Rihla panel series. We're truly excited to be here and partnering with the Policy Center for the New South and the Imal Initiative for Climate and Development, our two institutional partners for the policy phase of the Rihla Initiative, which is the first phase of our work. Before introducing our speakers, I wanted to give you some background about the Rihla Initiative. So the Rihla Initiative is really a project dedicated to understanding ways in which we can increase and expand Gulf climate financing in the Global South. And by that, we already know it's based on a recognition that the GCC states, particularly Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE, are very active in investments all around the world, in countries near and far in their pursuit of a green transition. And our work, really, our objective here for the first phase is to analyze and present a policy framework needed to ensure that these investments contribute not only to a green transition, but also a just transition. At the same time, our work is also looking at how these investments support economic diversification efforts within the GCC itself. The Rihla Initiative focuses on 4 regions: the Middle East and North Africa, Central Asia and the Caucasus, South and Southeast Asia, and Sub-Saharan Africa. And today, the initiative includes 80 members across 2 councils, a policy council and an implementation council. The policy council brings voices together from climate finance, sustainable development, and climate financing more broadly. And the implementation council is composed of experienced practitioners. Each council also has a Gulf committee made up of GCC nationals and Gulf-based experts. Each region is represented by an 8-member policy council and a 6-member implementation council, and the Gulf committee includes 12 members. I'm very happy that we have Lydia from the policy council here with us, as well as Jessica and Ahmed from the Gulf committee. Over the past 6 months, we have convened a range of closed-door meetings, workshops, and simulation exercises with our council members from each of the regions, covering topics such as renewable energy, industrialization, infrastructure, and water, among others. We have also formed cross-regional and cross-council focus groups to provide deeper analysis on specific sectors, including the blue economy, green urban development, sustainable agriculture, as well as competition and cooperation with China. A few weeks ago, we published the first major output of the initiative, the Rihla Handbook, a guide to accelerating Gulf climate finance in the Global South. Last week, we also released our first two policy briefs looking at the Gulf in specific, but also on the MENA region as well. I encourage you to read both reports because they really reflect the insights from our Policy Council members. And before I turn to our discussion, I also want to invite you to join our next panel, which will take place in Johannesburg on September 29 on Sub-Saharan Africa. This will be followed by another panel in Bangkok looking at Southeast Asia on October 2nd. I'll pause here. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, the first panel on Gulf climate finance and investment in green economic growth across the wider MENA is about to begin. Please join me in welcoming the moderator for this panel, Dr. Mehran Hagirian, Director of Research Programs at the Bourse and Bazaar Foundation. As well as the speakers for this session, Mr. Ahmed Al-Jamil, Climate Policy Researcher at the Center for Environmental Policy, Imperial College London. Ms. Lydia Al-Bouazzati, Energy Policy Consultant. Ms. Sabrine Imran, Senior Economist at the Policy Center for the New South. Ms. Jessica Ubaid, Founder Partner of the Energy Consult, who will be joining us shortly. Dr. Mehran Hagirian, the floor is yours.
Can you hear me? Yes. Thank you very much. So they introduced you, but I will just give a brief background of our speakers as well. So to my left, Ahmed Al-Jamil is also is a Rihla Gulf Committee member. He is a climate policy researcher at the Center for Environmental Policy at the Imperial College London. He is also a nominated expert on the UNFCCC roster of experts participating in a technical expert review of biannual transparency reports under the Enhanced Transparency Framework of the Paris Agreement. Ahmed has extensive experience in international energy and climate policy, including climate finance, having served as a lead negotiator of climate finance agenda items at COP26, 27, and 28, as well as advisor to the Board of Green Climate Fund. Lydia Al-Bouazzati is a Rihla Policy Council member for Middle East and North Africa. She is an independent consultant with expertise in energy and industrial policy. She specializes in the multifaceted dimensions of energy policy with a particular focus on its intersection with socioeconomic development. Lydia also has a strong technical expertise as an oil and gas engineer. Sabrine Imran is a senior economist at the Policy Center for the New South, working on commodities and energy markets. She is a finance graduate specializing in financial markets and commodities. She began her career in investment writing and product development in the asset management branches of insurance companies and investment banks in Paris, working mainly on alternative investment asset classes. More recently, she served as a commodities analyst, focusing on risk management strategies for energy and agricultural commodities, as well as foreign exchange risks. Jessica Ubaid is a Gulf Committee member. She is an energy engineer and strategist with experience spanning complex infrastructure, high-level policy, and regulatory reform, contribute to the development of clean energy systems in the Middle East, Africa, and Europe. She is a founding partner of New Energy Consult in Dubai and head of energy transition at SRMG Think in Riyadh. Thank you very much for joining us. So to start our discussion, as I mentioned, I'm very pleased to have three of our Policy Council members here joining us. And as the publications really reflect their voices more than ours, I would like to really ask them to present their insights mainly on and reflections on the publications and how they really view the Gulf climate financing in its broader context within the Middle East and North Africa region. And I will start with Jessica, if it's okay. So Jessica, what are the strategic motivations really driving GCC climate finance investments in the wider MENA region? If you could start our conversation with that.
So that's part of the broader diversification, economic diversification goals of the Gulf countries. And the Gulf states have mostly built big, giant champions in renewable energy and clean energy. For example, Aqua Power in Saudi Arabia, Masdar in the UAE. And these big giants are looking for good investment opportunities. And of course, they're looking for bankable projects. And that's a key driver. It helps, it provides economic returns and profitable ventures for these champions and for the Gulf states. And it also enables energy transition in MENA countries where there's a struggle to attract finance. A key driver also is the scale of projects, because GCC countries have the experience in building at mega-scale projects. And we're seeing that in several MENA countries. Just for context, for example, any project that's larger than 1 and 5 megawatts in the US is considered large-scale solar project, and that's the bulk of projects in the US. The average scale of solar PV in the UK is 50 megawatts. The largest is almost 150 megawatts. What we see in the region, in MENA countries, We have a range of 200, 300 average for solar farms, much bigger projects, mega scale in the Gulf. But there is scale, bankability, and it's, of course, part of broader economic diversification.
So Ahmed, as Jessica mentioned, these are not even mega projects now, these are giga projects. So how can these investments really promote sustainable and inclusive economic growth beyond infrastructure alone?
Well, thank you very much. And I just wanted to say some few words to our host. I really wanted to thank all the PCNS, Amal Initiative, and the people of Morocco and Morocco as a country. It's an amazing place to be in, to be honest, and I love this place. And thank you very much for all the hospitality and the welcoming that we have received since yesterday till today. So thank you very much for this. Answering your question, it is actually a very important question. And not only our region, whether Gulf or MENA region or our world, it is a global issue nowadays. So people are actually started, let's say, early 2019, 2020, to really focus more into ESG. So environment, social, and governance kind of principles as a guiding principle for investing. And this is actually very important. And speaking on behalf of the Saudi Arabia's perspective with regards to this, I think Saudi Arabia is actually viewing this as an anchor to grab foreign direct investment. So I believe all other countries as well, including Morocco, for example, is looking into it in this aspect. So it is actually very important to grab all the foreign direct investment, the FDI, and all the financial flows to the country, and specifically with our topic to, for example, energy transition or green economic growth or green industries, etc. So this is something very important. But bearing this in mind also, we need to focus also, speaking on behalf of our region, a broader region of our world, we need to view this in terms of the sustainable development. So we are still like developing countries. We need to develop lots of other sectors within our economies, like health, education, infrastructures. We still have different priorities when it comes to developed worlds, for example, and different interests. So having said this, and it's actually embedded on the Paris Agreement on UNFCCC conventions, which is the sustainable development context, sustainable development goals, which are very key and critical, especially to developing countries and least developed countries, since we are also in the African continent, which is, they have a couple of least developed countries that still, as we speak, they lack access to energy, access to electricity, clean cooking, which is actually very sad to actually say and discuss in 2025, this year. Thank you.
Thanks for raising those issues, because when we refer to this green economic development, it's largely on the renewable energy aspect, and the conversations really steer towards the topic of renewable energy most of the time. But we really want to make sure that there are other considerations, other sectors to really look at within this context as well. But before we do, I would like to turn to Lydia, and as Karim mentioned earlier, oil and gas is an important part of the energy industry in all of the world right now, particularly within the Middle East and North Africa. But the shift from fossil fuels to renewables is just not about infrastructure, it's about people as well. So how do we transfer oil and gas expertise into the skill sets needed for renewables as well?
Well, first, thank you for having me as part of this esteemed panel. I'm truly honored. And talking about that shift to green energy and green industry, well, many of the skills used within the oil and gas sectors are actually transferable to the renewable energy sector. Most technologies still use turbines, piping valves, etc. especially when it comes to wind technologies, CCS, hydrogen, etc. Then, of course, new skills have to be developed, new competence, and that should be an effort that would be implemented within the education system, of course. But then I would say that maybe this time, rather than focusing on operating and maintaining these equipments and these technologies, maybe it's an opportunity to go further and to actually design and build and innovate in these technologies. And that comes with funding research, for example, and encouraging technology transfer from foreign companies that come and implement those projects within the MENA region.
Thank you. Sabrine, so if we look at finance, so are MENA's financial institutions really integrating climate into their core strategies, or is it still treated as a side niche?
I think there are two ways to see this. I will start with the first component. When we look at the MENA, there are different countries in the MENAs, and the level of readiness is very different. So if we want to look at the champions, the UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, they're already integrating climate, not only through ESG, but also through integrating risk matrix that take into account green components. However, is this done vertically, or is it still treated as something that is a side? I think as of today, it is still a branch of the whole investment panorama. The other thing I want to talk about, Ahmed has mentioned ESG, and this morning we have mentioned integration. And I think one of the ways to look at it is that although we have ESG that is presented at the different levels of the asset management, the portfolios that are available for investors, whether they are institutional or retail investors, we are not talking about the same ESG. We're not talking about the same, we're not talking the same language. And this is something that we have written about with my colleague Reem and other colleagues for the T20 2 years ago, how we need a common ESG framework in order to have more transparency, a common taxonomy, but also like having the same components for ESG ready for all investors. When it comes to the MENA region, that it be the GCC or North African countries, I think what we need is, like Jessica mentioned, bankable projects, but also risk mitigation. And unless there is a certain level of transparency that we reach in terms of what we mean by green investment, and unless we have a component of green that is done on a vertical level and the different branches of finance, we will still have a problem of reaching the trust of investors, level up the investments that we need, both for North African countries, but also not only seeing GCC countries as providers of capital, but rather having win-win partnerships where the green financial market is growing through the whole region and not only from provider and receiver point of view.
Thank you, that's excellent. So Jessica, it's one thing to finance projects, but another to really connect grids, align energy systems, and match policies. So from your perspective, how do we balance the technical and political challenges so these cross-border projects actually last?
I think it's important to note, and sorry, I have a sinus issue, so it's impacting my voice. It's important to note that energy and especially electricity are just enablers of economic growth. And there's also a very stabilizing factor in terms of broader political economy and political landscape. So we see if electricity costs rise up a lot, or if we have electricity shortages, it's normally leads to uprising, protests, and others. So energy is an enabler of economic development. Expensive energy would reduce household income and purchasing power of individuals, and also the business competitiveness of industries, commercial entities, etc. So they're part of that landscape, and we cannot look at it at energy only from a technical perspective. But we also need electricity. Intercon is going to be something that we're all going to need with the new energy systems being developed. First, in terms of renewable energy integration into the grid, when it surpasses 10%, for example, of the power mix, it could cause fluctuations, volatility on the grid. So we need to stabilize the grid. One easy way to stabilize the grid is to connect to other grid intercons. Two, now we're racing to add power generation capacity in the region. Not everywhere, as you mentioned, Sabine. We have places that have power shortages. My own country, Lebanon, suffers from electricity blackouts, chronic electricity blackouts. But in other countries, in Morocco, in Egypt, in high-income MENA countries, in the GCC, we're seeing a race to add power generation capacity. We're always adding power generation. And we can also address that by connecting our grids because we have different time zones, for example, here in Morocco compared to the GCC, so different peak times. We can benefit from the generation capacity in other regions. We have very ambitious renewable energy targets here for 52%, 50% in Saudi Arabia and others. We cannot reach these targets if we do not tap into collaborating with other countries. So it's easier. We either have to spend billions, trillions of dollars, or we collaborate and connect our grids and exchange this green electricity. The future is for collaboration and regional integration. And it's not only an important part for our energy system, it's very important for our economies. Our region is very negatively impacted by climate change. We have higher cooling demand now, higher temperature, higher water demand. So collaboration becomes very, very important just to make sure that we have a good livelihood, we have economic growth in the future, especially in a global competition over resources, over water, over financing. So collaboration is the way forward. I think it's something that we have to do and we're going to do for all, just to maintain our economic growth and just our lives.
On that point, Jessica, we just discussed earlier today that the GCC interconnected grid was connected recently to Iraq, for example, and that's some form of a regional integration in itself. So what would be some practical steps that would be needed for this collaboration to be more region-wide within the context of the Middle East and North Africa?
The connection with Iraq is very good also for Iraq. That also suffers from power shortages, chronic shortages, and the high dependence on imports from Iran, whether in gas and electricity. And that's subject to sanctions and political issues, like the US recently just said, we're not going to give you waivers anymore to import gas from Iran. They might do that also in the future for electricity. And Iraq is already struggling with blackouts, especially in summer. So that becomes a matter of sustaining livelihoods and also the economy. And we're seeing also that being played now in Syria, where electricity, as I say, is a diplomatic currency. It's very important for the countries selling electricity because it provides revenues, but also could be a stabilizing factor. And moving forward, we have a lot of unstable countries in the region, so many countries struggling with power shortages, so many post-conflict countries. So the grid integration can also provide stability for these countries and could be the first step into providing economic recovery, because you cannot improve your economy if you don't have electricity eventually. But a key factor now is that we also subsidize electricity in most of the countries in the MENA. So we have to find a way, because no country wants to sell subsidized electricity, subsidized fossil fuel to other countries. So we need to have this governance framework on how do we develop a very efficient electricity exchange market, and to come to terms with the value of this electricity, at which cost it would be sold. We need to do a grid enhancement. So we need this framework to come forward, to build this framework and make sure we have a solid governance and bring all the different entities to the table.
Thank you very much. So, Ahmed, mitigation often gets the lion's share of funding, and adaptation projects, especially in water and agriculture, lag behind. So how do we change this equation? As Jessica also alluded to, for renewable energy, for electricity generation or whatnot, water is also a key requirement. And how do we really move from mitigation-focused funding to adaptation as well?
This is really a very critical question. And I recall this is also the negotiations and the discussions and more like a multilateral meetings and forums, maybe Iskander also agree with me on this, that we provokely and we always insist in the Arab group and Arab regions that adaptation is our priority. And we need all along, not even in the Arab world, even for all developing countries, that adaptation is important, adaptation is a priority for us. And we also insist and emphasize that the balance between adaptation and mitigation needs to be there as well. So I see your point and I see your questions. That is actually, there is kind of a mismatch between what the decisions or discussions in the policy-making fora is actually saying or doing, and what the reality of the matter. And this is actually an interesting question that we hope we can solve. And it goes all the way to what we discussed before, which is bankable projects, the technicality of the matter, the regulations and the policy on the ground. I heard from our dear colleagues here in Morocco, they say maybe if it's a big project that could be easily done, and if it's billions US dollars, it can easily be facilitated or done here in Morocco. But if it's small and medium enterprise, there are lots of difficulties, lots of paperwork, etc. So I think the key is actually on this. And part of it, of course, the ESG investing. So if ESG and all the standards and regulations, even the international ones, are pretty focused on the mitigation and prioritizing mitigation over adaptation, which is the priority of other regions, not necessarily our region, the result is what we see. I go back to having a common ESG metrics or standards, which is something that we can have. Yes, it's a perfect situation, but the reality of the matter is that different regions have different interests and different priorities. So it'd be very difficult and almost impossible to have a common and even understanding of what ESG is. I think the negotiation is still ongoing with regards of defining climate finance under the UNFCCC. So even what should be under climate finance is still debatable. So is this good, is this bad? We don't know. Definitely it's bad if it's against our priority. But of course it's good if it's something inclusive, holistic approach where adaptation is equally deal with regards to the mitigation, for example, etc. So this is very important. Now, how to do it is something else. But at the same time, Saudi Arabia, GCC in general, they did really bold steps with regards counting adaptation co-benefits as a means of implementation, as a means of mitigation. That was back in 2012 in Doha. Even counting economic diversification as a means of adaptation. So I will explain this now. So if a country is undergoing an economic diversification, it will also undergo adaptation. And that necessarily, sometimes, will have also a mitigation co-benefits. So you can do both sometimes. So the only barrier was whether the international community and the international climate policy will accept this as a means of mitigation. But that was actually, we succeeded with this in the decision CP18 in Doha, 2012. So this is important. So I believe the strategic position for our region is to go with adaptation, with mitigation co-benefits, trying to influence and change all the narratives when it comes to the ESG, sustainability standards for the investments in a way that captured adaptation projects as well with this regard. I hope that answers your questions.
Thank you very much. So Ahmed, you've been involved in the UNFCCC climate negotiations, and I want to see, how do you see the Gulf actors and other MENA countries positioning themselves within these negotiations? And do you see the region really building a stronger collective voice?
Thank you very much for asking this question. So the GCC and Saudi Arabia is actually leading the negotiations, sort of saying. So we are taking parts of this, and all countries, including Arab countries. And we have different blocs, different groups, negotiating groups. One of them, of course, is the Arab group, where all Arab countries are involved there. So we coordinate with our all interests and priorities for all those countries in different agendas. So one of them is climate finance. Our priority, as I said, for climate finance is number one, is that finance is a means of implementation of the Paris Agreement and the conventions. And it's based on the principles and the values of the conventions, which is, of course, the eradication of poverty, sustainable development, and a common but differentiated responsibility and respective capability, as we call CBDR principle, which is basically the whole convention that was started in 1992 was based on this, based on, yes, as developing countries and least developed countries who are actually just coming to the race of industrialization compared to developed worlds, which those countries started early 1850, like the Industrial Revolution and pre-industrial revolution. So the only way to convince all countries to come into a convention to combat climate change is the CBDR principle, common but differentiated responsibility. We have a common goal to achieve, but we have differentiated responsibilities based on the historical responsibility. So climate finance is one of them. So climate finance under the Convention and the Paris Agreement is to be provided from developed countries to developing countries. So Saudi Arabia and GCC countries are actually vocal on this and supporting all Arab countries and all, not even Arab countries, all developing countries and least developed countries in Africa and Southeast Asia to actually get the finance they need in order to undergo the energy transition or the transition, the green transition that we want to accomplish. I recall one report from ESCWA. So ESCWA is like the UN body for West Asia. They published parts of the needs-based finance, which is a program under the climate finance and the UNFCCC. They did some exercise on terms of, that was part actually feeding into the NCQG, which is trying to quantify the needs of the Arab region when it comes to climate finance. That time, excluding some countries, it is almost 570 billion US dollars by 2030 only. So it's not even reaching net zero by 2550 or by 2060. This is a huge amount of money. And it's also sent a signal to investors, to private sectors, that this is actually something that the countries and the region is going to, if they want to achieve or meet the pledge of the current NDC. So we are talking about the current NDC by 2030. It's not even net zero pledge, which is by the mid of century. Yeah, so that's it.
Thank you very much. Lydia, so policy reforms like carbon pricing and subsidy reform are tough but necessary. So what's the driving momentum for these reforms in MENA and what's holding them back?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So there are two parts to these policy reforms. I would say reforming fossil fuel subsidies and implementing green transition incentives. And these two parts have actually the same drivers. So, as you know, many of the MENA countries, regardless of whether they are oil importing or exporting countries, subsidize the fossil fuels. And this is to support the domestic consumption. It is also to maintain social stability and to maintain a competitive edge for the industrial sector. But this comes with a burden, with the fiscal burden for all these countries. And this is one of the main drivers to incentivize through subsidies, maybe carbon markets that are explored in the country, not yet implemented, to maybe balance more the national budgets and divert this money toward more important or critical sectors such as education, health, etc. Another driver is the climate commitments. So MENA countries have committed to greenhouse gases reduction, emissions reduction, and either keeping the fossil fuel subsidies or not catching the train of the green transition would not help meet those climate pledges. A third driver would be the need to diversify the economy away from fossil fuels, to be part of this new map of global economy that is now shaping, that we see now. The old maps where fossil fuels, where economies were depending on fossil fuels, whether it comes to resources, technologies, and industries, are now changing towards new maps of where the resources of critical minerals are, where the patents for the renewable energy technologies are, and where the industries are. So if the MENA countries want to keep their seats around the global economy table, or have a new seat, is a big driver. The barriers or challenges, actually nothing that these countries can't achieve. Maybe some resistance by historically monopolistic utilities, and maybe also some social resistance, but solutions like policies targeting most vulnerable populations when removing the fossil fuel subsidies exist, and they are working. They have proven efficient in other places.
Thank you very much. So Sabrine, we've seen Gulf investments in Morocco gain traction, and as we discussed earlier today, it's a front runner in receiving Gulf investments, particularly in the Middle East and North Africa region, but also I think globally. Do you think these partnerships could become a model for wider MENA green growth, or are these causing some barriers as well in the sense of needing to address some of the hurdles that we are facing?
Yes, as we mentioned this morning, Morocco receives one of the highest, if not the highest amount of investments from GCC countries when it comes to energy transition projects. We have seen that through different actors, even in the green hydrogen competitors that won the first offer, we have GCC actors that are there. And this is due to several factors, again, going back to bankability of projects, but also political stability, currency stability, and really everything that that is addressed and could hinder private investors' perception of risk in a country. Has it been working for Morocco? Yes. Is it something that could be applied for every country? I think that there are different contexts, because if we look at the MENA region, if we look at the African continent, we have different energy mixes, we have different priorities. We are coming from very different starting points. And for Morocco, switching to renewable energy was really an obvious solution, because we do not have fossil fuels on our ground, and sometimes it is a blessing in disguise, because it actually obliges you to go look for renewable sources of energy and become one of the first players, because you don't have a choice. Again, when we look at it, I think that what makes it appealing for partners is that we are looking at something that is steady for both ends. For Morocco, it contributes to economic growth, it contributes to greening the electricity mix, but also for countries that are investing, they are looking at a stable and long-term partnership that is that gives return on investment. Otherwise, we wouldn't have the same example going back. But I think what we should keep in mind is that going forward, whether it comes to Morocco or other examples of countries, we will be looking at different types of investments. What I mean by that is that we wouldn't and we shouldn't be only looking at one sector-focused investment. Investments that go into silos are not something that will stay with us in the future. What I mean by that is that GCC countries, when they invest their money, it's because they're invested in energy transition as well. We are all in the same boat. Climate change is not leaving anyone behind. And at the receiving country of the investment, I think what we need is looking at the long-term perspective of it. And as we mentioned today, Morocco is one of the countries that when we look at projects for renewable energy, we're looking at the long term of it. What I mean by not keeping the silos perspective is looking at what are the positive outcomes that we have from that investment on other sector. Is it related to the industry sector? How can I link it to the port industry? How can I create sustainable jobs that do not only stop at the phase of construction? I do not just construct solar panels and then leave them there, and people who have been invested in that phase cannot find other jobs as well. How can I be invested in green training as well? And this requires looking at the green investment perspective from a value chain one, where when I look at the long-term perspective of it, I will be looking at different segments of the economy while I'm making that decision. And this is the only way where we can have a sustainable, not only in the green side, but a sustainable even in time investment that are coming and long-term partnerships between GCC countries, Morocco, but also other countries from the MENA region that would like to be in the same framework or follow the same example, for instance.
Thank you. So if we look at it this way, aside from geopolitical fraternity, let's say, between these countries, that obviously between, for example, UAE and Saudi Arabia, as well as with Morocco, that has an impact. But aside from that, there's the regulatory framework and the stability within the currency and other aspects of the country in terms of being welcoming to investments. And that's something that I think the majority of the MENA countries are lacking in the context of not being as welcoming to Gulf investors, even though as we discussed, there's more need maybe elsewhere in the region, but they're not as successful in really attracting Gulf financing. So Jessica, how do you think other countries in the region could really learn from the Moroccan experience in terms of providing the avenues required for increasing Gulf investments?
There are definitely different contexts in terms of the energy landscape, but also economic and political stability across the different MENA regions. So it's very difficult to pinpoint that this is the framework, and if you just develop the same one and you replicate it, it would work. And the key problematic in most countries is political, economic, financial instability that makes it difficult to replicate that. But one very important factor in the Moroccan experience has been strong institutions, and institutions with very clear mandates and very focused on what they're developing. And that has helped drive the energy transition forward, especially Morocco was on the forefront of establishing an agency for sustainable energy development, like Mazen, for example. And that has provided a very clear, targeted vision on the way forward. We see in some countries there could be conflict of interest because the electricity utility is also the one that's driving decentralized renewable energy, for example, and that doesn't work because renewable energy, small-scale rooftops would become, there would be a conflict of interest because if you're a consumer and you install rooftop solar PV, then your bill is going to be reduced and then you're creating less revenues for the utility, so the utility doesn't like that. So we've seen in different institutions could be conflict of interest that hinders energy transition instead of driving it forward. So we've seen in the Moroccan experience that institutions is very important. There's a track record And that becomes a bit also a chicken and egg situation, because you need a track record and experience in project development to attract money for project development. But how do you get that track record if you cannot attract investment in the first place? But now Morocco has all this track record in bankable projects, so it's easier to attract and mobilize financing, and that makes it, especially was also combined with a very good strategic location, a lot of investors would still be eyeing Morocco. But building that track record and building a bankable project is also problematic in so many countries. And it starts with having the resources to mobilize, to build these projects, to mobilize them, to have them bankable. It requires experience, it requires technical people, legal people with all these resources. So we also need money to attract money, which becomes an issue. And what we've seen, and even if we want to address other things like global climate funds, that also the bulk of it goes to Morocco and Egypt. So you need, for example, to apply for a climate finance, you need to spend 4 or 5 years to just develop the application and submit the application. And you need staff and team who have expertise in that specific thing to file it. And most countries don't have that. So we get back to how do you get money to get further money. And that's a big issue, but definitely institutions is the way forward, and focusing on how do we develop bankable projects is something that all MENA countries should be looking at.
So if we look at if we want to take the conversation towards a more regional angle, and we had a lengthy discussion this morning about regional integration, and so if we look at landmark projects like Noor in Morocco or Benban in Egypt, what's the big takeaway for scaling Gulf MENA partnerships? What do they teach us about building a roadmap for regional cooperation or regional integration?
The blueprint, especially for these big projects, has been that they're very bankable and it has a constant and kind of predictable revenues and cash flows for the investors. So if you have any sort of instability, investors are going to walk away. If they don't know that this is the return on revenue they're going to make, this is the cash flow they're going to have every year for the next 25 years or so, it's not going to work. So the power purchase agreements of these projects have provided a constant and very certain cash flow for investors. They're quite large scale. Benban project is 1.8 gigawatt. The experience from Benban, for example, was very interesting, as they divided it into several plots and they had different developers. So it was easy to just get it sorted. And something very important that both Morocco and Egypt would have, especially in the experiences in Benban, is licensing requirements. And we find that licensing could be tricky in so many developing countries, including several MENA countries. If you're a developer, you need a license to sell power to the utility, since we're a single buyer model. You need a license, you need an offer to connect to the grid, you need to get the land, you have a lot of factors, and if you don't know where you're gonna get these, which institution is in charge of it, how long it would take, it might take, even in Europe, it takes several years. So that hinders investments, and that makes the investments cost and the landing cost also very high, and the risks premium very high, which means that there would be less investment, more risk, and less investors attracted into the market, and finally higher costs on the utility and the consumer.
Thank you very much. Ahmed, so do you think there is any merit, for example, in having a GCC-wide framework for climate financing in terms of, in the context of duplication and complementarity? Do you think there is room to collaborate amongst, for example, UAE and Saudi organizations that are active in investments?
No, definitely. This is very important. And work has been actually done when it comes to integration and collaboration, because from the name, it's a GCC, so it's a collaboration council. So the integration between the different sectors, regulations, and policy has been doing, and I believe it's under the energy council and energy committee and environment committee under the GCC. as an organization when it comes to the policy making. But so going back to having a common understanding, common standards, common regulations, or even common policy, the idea is, of course, as Jessica mentioned, the fact is we need to have a political will, which I think we have it within GCC. We share lots of similarities, geographical proximity, yes, but also not only geographical proximity, but we share quite similar economic structures. And we discussed that Saudi Arabia has a different and unique economic structures and aspirations. But mostly, yes. And we think that it is actually very important to get this. And Saudi Arabia is actually thinking not only the GCC, but the whole region is important to have an inclusive and a common understanding when it comes to the transition, to be honest. That's why the Middle East, the Saudi Green Initiative, but then also at the same time, the Middle East Green Initiative was launched in 2021. Because the idea of economic growth, political stability, and clean transition, equitable and just, is actually not, when Saudi Arabia is doing this, is not only for Saudi Arabia or even for GCC, but the whole region. Because the stability of the region, the economic growth for the whole region is actually as strong for Saudi Arabia and for other countries. So this is the key. So, and this is the main driver for such thing. So in order to reach that understanding, also we need to bear in mind there are different capacities. Also commenting on what Jessica said about the capacity building in terms of drafting and reporting and reporting the proposals for, especially for Green Climate Fund, because I sat on the board at the board of GCF. Capacity building was an issue, to be honest, and many of the projects that were sent to the board are actually refused from the first stage because it's not whether the project is not bankable or it's not within the criteria of the funding. So this is very important. I think the GCF did something really interesting in this regards in terms of building the capacity of especially least developed countries. Maybe least developed countries are really in trouble, and the developed countries, especially European, are taking advantage out of this. So they are going to that countries, trying to help them, but with some hidden agenda. So this is something we don't want to see, to be honest, in our, especially in Arab world. But it's really sad to hear to kind of politicizing the green economic growth or the climate finance, etc. This is something we've been. It's unfortunately it's there, but hopefully with the union of the Arab world and with the shared principles, shared culture, shared religion, shared values, we can come up with a new paradigm shift with this regards, especially the transition we have. It is actually embedded in our culture, embedded in our religion, embedded in our region. We are actually our culture is actually for encouraging this transition, the clean transition, and hopefully with the help of the partnerships and collaborations between countries, we can do this. Now, going back to the GCC, we still have also capacity building within the GCC. It's not only with the developing countries, the least developed countries, even high-income country, developing but high-income country are actually facing difficulties with regards to capacity building, especially on these new emerging topics. When we speak about sustainable energy or energy transition or climate policy, we tend to assume that high-income countries have the knowledge or capacity for this, but the reality of the matter, no. So I think part of that is actually raising awareness, building the capacities as well for the GCC itself, but also at the same time trying to find the investment opportunities. So as we speak, and let's talk about the numbers because I always love the language of numbers. So yes, Saudi Arabia is focusing on adaptation and also increasing the clean hydrocarbons technologies and sustainability of oil, but at the same time, increasing. Hello? Yep. No. Oh, it's not working.
Hello.
Hi.
We need to finish. Yes. Oh, no.
I think the AV is off. Hello. Hello.
Test.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. So in terms of renewable energy capacity, etc., so Saudi Arabia is pledged to have 50% renewable by 2030, and this is well articulated in the National Determined Contribution. I can shout.
Hello.
Okay. In the national determined contribution, and in terms of the installed capacity, so by the end of 2024, 44 gigawatt tendered inside renewable energy in Saudi Arabia, and this is 50% of all installed capacity in the UK, 90% of all installed capacity in Sweden, and almost 100% of installed capacity in Austria, and I think Switzerland. So this is huge. And these numbers have also huge investments and huge partnerships, and not necessarily in Saudi Arabia only. The whole kind of momentum is led by Aquapower, and I think Aquapower also has a presence here in Morocco as well. So this is, we live in 21st century where the whole globe is like a one village. And whether it's direct or indirect benefits or investments, it's actually going into the same channel, the main channel. Now, this is only by the end of last year. So until 2030, in order to reach 50%, Saudi Arabia is planning to have 130 gigawatt installed capacity. I mean, depending on also the growth. So this is huge. So almost we need to double it as well. This is huge, like, and in terms of aspirations, in terms of localizations, and local content, providing sustainable jobs as well, as you mentioned. So Saudi Arabia is actually taking this very seriously, not only for climate finance, not only for energy transition, but for whole economic growth and green economic growth, because this is maybe, if you believe or not in green or climate, but you should believe that it is actually the future. And for example, and I already gave this example in the morning, so there has been like lots of ideas in Saudi Arabia for in terms of the industrial revolution, etc., and development and growth, to open up a automobile manufacturing company, etc. So that was back and forth for almost 15 to 20 years. Until a few years, they changed they go on with the idea, but they change the narrative. So they open up electric vehicle company called Seer. This is 100% Saudi. That's in addition of the foreign direct, PIF, Public Investment Fund investments in Lucid, which is US company, but will open up a plant in Saudi Arabia as part of the investments. So different tracks. So the first track is actually to localize the technologies. Could be Moroccan technology, for example, or investment in Saudi Arabia. But the other one is really to establish a new sector, a new company. This is kind of the perspective of how Saudi Arabia or GCC is looking into. Maybe this is special to Saudi Arabia, different from other GCC countries. But we look into green economic growth as a way to diversify the economy, yes, but also not only to diversify the economy, but also to grow the economy in a green way. Thank you.
Yeah. So thanks for that, because it leads to my next question to Sabrine. We just discussed that there was 5 consortiums competing for green hydrogen in Morocco, and one of them was Aqua Power, the other was Taga, the other was Chinese company, and another was a US-European company collaboration, and another one was Morocco. We also discussed the fact that maybe it's also the onus is on the GCC side to create some room for regional cooperation or regional integration within their targeted investments. But how can, for example, Morocco prepare the grounds for these 5 companies to work together, or at least 2 of them, for example, within a consortium type of manner? Is there room for such collaborations? I'm saying this also within the context of the elephants in the room, which is China and the European Union, particularly for the context of Morocco. In the 3 other regions that we're working, China is really dominant. Also in the Middle East and North Africa, but within the North Africa context, we also have the European involvement. So how do you see that triangulation, let's say, within collaborations?
I think one direct answer is that one of the GCC players, Taqa, is already collaborating with one of the elephants, Muebe, and they're both together the same winner for the offer. So they're actually they were actually selected to work together in a consortium. So the short answer is yes, this is possible, not only among GCC countries only, but also through collaboration with other parts of the world. I mean, as Ahmed just said, the world is becoming one small village in some way. And if you put aside what's actually beyond the energy components, beyond the infrastructure component that could hinder the effectiveness of this collaboration or this relationship, I think it is feasible. I know, for instance, for the green hydrogen roadmap that we have in Morocco, one of the first milestones would be 2030. And the challenges that would be faced are known ones that Morocco is really putting in mind and being prepared for, because the first green hydrogen roadmap was presented in 2019. So here, as the offer is concretized and we have some selected champions, we have gone through some way. So the regulatory framework is very important, making sure that we have the right infrastructure, and also the scalability of green hydrogen, which will not only depend on Morocco's readiness or the selected actors, it would also depend on how we advance in terms of research and development to reach the prices that we would like to have in the future for green hydrogen to be competitive. And as we said this morning, there is room for a very sane and a very productive competition. I mean, for Morocco, a big part of the green hydrogen roadmap is supplying the European market, 75% of exports in the perspectives, but also other actors such as Saudi Arabia, for instance, and Egypt could and would like to supply the European market as well. The question is, how technologically ready will we be in the future, in the upcoming few years, to have, as I mentioned, a competitive green hydrogen? Because the idea is to have a diversified energy mix, and not only to have one green energy mix that only relies on one source of energy, because we would not like to go back to times of darkness or times of shortages. If we have a steady electricity grid, then we would like to stick to that. If we can make it greener, that is the win that we are looking at. I think another segment where this applies as well, besides green hydrogen, is also through critical minerals, because we have seen a lot of competition between the US and China when it comes to critical minerals, in the example of many African countries. And here we are asking ourselves the question, are those critical minerals only beneficial for countries that are looking through for their energy transition, but not only that, also technological transition for their AI, or is it also benefiting the countries that have the resources or the ground? For instance, mentioned in the DRC and the cobalt, and how the presence of China in transforming the whole value chain is very concentrated. The answer is still in collaboration, because if you diversify the actors that you have on your ground, you have less focused and less risk when it comes to one only investor. The second thing is that, for instance, to have a country that is leveraging the potential of the resources that they have on the ground, they have to be actors in their value chain as well. And if finances are an issue, then they shouldn't rely on one actor. This is where the presence of GCC countries, for instance, in African countries with mineral resources is beneficial, because there you have a multitude of actors and you do not rely on only one country that has the total of transformation of the value chain of your critical mineral. And I think one good example that I have seen is still in the DRC through the Buenasa SRL, and basically it's about leveraging the potential of the cobalt in the country for not only being exported in its raw form or being transformed by China, but also contributing to the production of a factory that is still a small scale but receiving investments as we speak, for producing batteries that come from the cobalt of the DRC. And I think that this is the kind of partnerships that we should be looking at in the future, not only in the energy sector, but I'm mentioning critical minerals because they are very tightly linked and related to energy transition as well. If we're talking about windmills, solar panels, we need critical minerals for all of that, and for green hydrogen electrolyzers as well. So as we look forward, I think the concentration of one type of investor in one country is not beneficial for the receiving country, and having an array and diversified panorama of investors that include the GCC can only be beneficial, whether it's for the case of Morocco or other African countries, as I just mentioned.
Excellent, thank you very much. Jessica, so how would you view the, let's say, this triangulation or partnerships with China or the European Union and its impact on the private sector in the local community, let's say, in the context of Morocco, but elsewhere in the region as well?
I think that global competition could be quite benefit for the region, especially in terms of we've had tariffs on China that could benefit the region in terms of localization, and with the push of many GCC countries, Morocco and others, and including Egypt, on localizing the supply chain for clean energy, for example, could be a push to create manufacturers and industries in the region and then ship from the region. And that also creates some more interest of the different parties in investing in the MENA countries. But we really, to make the best of that, we just need to have a clear vision for the region of what we can provide. For example, in terms of localized supply chain, not every country should be doing assembly of solar panels, creating electric vehicles, and we need to be more focused on what's the optimal use of resources every country could benefit from, and how we can collaborate to localize the supply chains within our region rather than within one country, because that's going to be expensive and mostly non-doable. But we just have to have more, and we get back to the broader theme of collaboration. But each country has assets, resources, and we need to have the optimal use of deciding what each country can offer for the benefit of the energy transition, and what each country can develop that the rest of the world would want, and how we can strengthen collaboration within the region to maintain strategic positioning for the entire region in a post-oil world when oil is not that relevant for the world, and how we can still maintain influence on this side of the world.
That's excellent. Thank you very much. I'll ask the last question from Lydia and open it to the floor. If you all have a question, please prepare it. So Lydia, you've worked a lot on the intersection of energy, gender, and climate change. And what would it take for MENA's green transition to be truly inclusive and benefit women and other marginalized groups as well?
Yeah, thank you. I think the inclusion theme has been discussed a little bit all throughout the panel. And there are many aspects to it. Of course, we can talk about including local communities in developed projects nearby, and of course respecting their needs for access to water, etc. And I'd like to go a little bit further in this inclusion concept. Why not think about it long term, how to make job creation, something more resilient to crisis, either global or national, and that would be by making these jobs created more with higher added value, which means developing innovation and having local industries for green technologies. Also, there is this, I would like to see inclusion also in between countries. So maybe we should maybe rid a little bit of the near-shoring position, and the MENA countries could be part of the global economy value chain. And another inclusion aspect in that would be not only think about new technologies, but also think of including the historic industries in these countries in this green momentum. As an example, the textile industry is present in North Africa and the Middle East region. It has to be included in this green momentum. It has to be modernized, decarbonized, the same for food industry and all the historic existing industries. So inclusion has actually many layers to it. And of course, you talked about gender-sensitive policies in this industrialization or green industrialization momentum has to be taken into account from the beginning in order not to have this gap, these gender gaps, to keep them for longer terms.
Thank you very much. I'm really privileged to have these 4 excellent speakers here. So if you have any questions, please raise your hand so that they can bring your mic to you.
Hello, thank you for this invitation. So my contribution is about, these bankable projects in relation with mitigation and adaptation. So as you know, investors and donors still attracted by mitigation projects over than adaptation. Here in Morocco, we need both of them, of course, and we are more impacted by the climate change. So normally we are interested more about adaptation projects. Of course, we have also a responsibility about this. I mean, for example, we can bring some projects which is also attractive for the donors, and in some times it can be adaptation projects. I can give an example. For example, we have this nuclear-powered desalination, which is a mitigation project because it reduces the emissions, of course, and we also tackle this problem of water stress. So it's adaptation. In your opinion, is it possible that we can, for example, impact the decision in the GCC countries and to bring more funds to these projects? Because for Morocco, it's a very important thing. It's affordable because this kind of nuclear energy station is less expensive, for example. And in the same time, we can reduce our dependence from the energy, and we can have the security of energy, which is a very big problem of ours, usually when there is a crisis in the world economy. So maybe it's just to push you to give more ideas about that, how we can discuss with the GCC countries, for example, this kind of projects.
Thank you very much. Jessica, would you like to respond? I would also add to it that what is your considerations about pursuing nuclear energy broadly in the MENA region?
Very difficult question, asking me this at the end of the panel. I think if the project has a clear investment prospects and is bankable, then it becomes easier to attract investments. However, nuclear, I'm pro-nuclear, but nuclear is expensive, and normally it has two problematics. One, its time frame ends up being much longer than initially factored in and anticipated. Two, it ends up being a lot more expensive than originally factored in most countries. So it's not that easy to just attract investment into nuclear. And when we look into the adaptation and mitigation debate is very critical, and we need funds that are more targeted toward adaptation. But even if we look into mitigation and why do we have this problematic of more money flowing into mitigation, we need to see where does the money going into mitigation actually goes. And it mostly goes into two sectors, energy and transport. And within energy, it's renewable energy. It's also a lot difficult to get financing for green hydrogen, for example. Only 5% of the green hydrogen projects globally have reached financial close. It's very difficult to get financing for storage if it's not combined with renewables. It's a lot difficult to get financing for carbon capture, just because renewable energy has something of two distinct characteristics. One, it's not an emerging technology anymore, and it has been deployed for decades in so many countries. And two, we have a very constant cash flow, and it's very easy and it's very straightforward where the money, where investors are going to get their money. They're going to sell electricity at X rate per kilowatt hour. It's very straightforward. That's not the case of most other technologies. And this is why the bulk of money is just flowing into mitigation, into renewable energy. It's very straightforward. It's more, I'm not saying in all countries it's bankable, because of course in MENA region we're witnessing the opposite, but it's straightforward and easy to deploy and easy to raise finance for compared to other technologies.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Whilst you prepare, I will. Yes.
I was happy that he didn't see I raised my hand. So I am no expert, but I do agree with everything that you've said and that Dr. Inawi also said about synergy, collaboration, and also I just wanted to ask a simple question. Can we also, when talking about investments, can we talk about individual investment, like being a good individual when we talk about water stress, or just like us as individuals, sometimes we've got to stop thinking and waiting for people to make big investments for us and for the planet and start actually taking actions and responsibility and become a good human being. And also, I would love to talk about something that Mrs. Lydia had spoken about. It's about jobs, like more resilient jobs. But I do find, and I've actually experienced this myself, I do find that there is a lack of mentorship. And also, we've got many degrees, and they are so absurd. So as a student, a young professional, individual, whomever we are, we try to figure out, like, what's the meaning of our degree? And you go with your hobbies and you try to find out things. But still, we want, like, there are investments, there are projects coming, but who's going to work there? We don't even have people whom are trained to do those jobs. And you spoke about solar panels or les photovoltaiques, les centrales photovoltaiques. As easy as like the cleaning of the centrale photovoltaic, we don't have people whom are capable of doing that or whom knows about that. So I am no expert. I'm just participating. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Lydia, would you like to respond first?
Thank you for your question. Well, I don't know any absurd trainings, honestly. I think they're all needed for this green transition. And to give a few examples, we need geographers to know our energy resources, to know how the wind blows, what direction, etc. We need also geographers to know about the demography and forecast demography, to know where populations will be and how to serve them with energy, etc. We need lawyers to craft good contracts. We need economists, and we also need humanities to know what project we are wanting as a society and how we want to go there. And the technical jobs actually come last, in my opinion. These are to execute what has been crafted before by economists, sociologists, geographers, any training really. I think they're all needed. So about jobs, you said maybe we need a little bit more production in terms of knowledge locally here. Maybe we can start here with research, either in the technological part of the transition or the economic part. Both are important. And then research will lay ground for innovation. Innovation will allow us to create companies, etc., etc. I hope it answers your question.
Thank you very much. Ahmed, would you like that?
Yes, if you can, I just add some comments and highlights with this regards. I think what you are saying is amazing, is great, and I think it's spot on when it comes to how we solve climate change in general. I always say global issues needs global efforts. And that's why we believe that specifically this issue of climate change needs all backgrounds, all fields, all diverse groups, including, for example, indigenous people, all young women and men, government officials, as well as private sectors, as well as NGOs, non-governmental or non-profit organizations, civil societies. So all of them are actually meeting at least once a year during the COP. And I had the privilege actually to attend and to discuss with all other ministers in terms of the Youth Day within the COP process. It is actually very promising. And young people, students, emerging professionals and leaders are actually taking part in these things. And it's essential because it's part of what we were discussing in terms of capacity building. So actually, by involving other groups, we are actually building the capacity for the future. And all what we are talking here is about the future, whether short future 2030 or long future like 2050 or 2060. So this is very important, and some actually companies and governments are actually taking bold decisions in this regard. So I remember my previous team. All of us are young, and maybe Iskander knows that as well. So he knows one of our colleagues. So all of them below 30, around 30ish. Discussing and engaging in policy making. Also, when it comes to multidisciplinary, I want also to shed light on this. Especially developed countries, for example, in London, Imperial College, they just established School of Convergence within the college, which is basically multidisciplinary school where professors there are from different disciplines to tackle global issues and important issues that actually needs multidisciplines. Something like AI, sustainability, climate, etc. So we need all of them. And I recall, so I'm chemist by training, so I know nothing about finance, nothing about policy, etc. So I used to just mix solvents and create materials. I don't know if any chemist here, but but the essence of this is really the foundation, the scientific methods, the critical thinking, the problem solving, the leadership skills that you can actually acquire and then apply to the real life examples. I still recall also the disciplines from our team like psychology, political science, electrical engineering, of course, then chemical engineering, but also at the same time economics and others, social work or sociology as well. So it is pretty a multidisciplinary field that you can actually involve, whether from your city level, local level, national level, even international level. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you very much. I think it was excellent. We're out of time, but I encourage you to speak to them during the break. Thank you very much for your attention and for your participation. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we will now break for a 15-minute coffee break by the Coffee Lounge. Thank you. Studies and success stories of Gulf investment in green economic growth in the wider MENA. Please join me in welcoming the moderator of this session, Ms. Rim Barhab, Senior Economist at the Policy Center for the New South, as well as the speakers for this session, Mr. Hisham Bouskri, Founder and CEO of the African Technical Advisors, Mr. Iskander Erzini Vernois, co-founder and director at IMAL Initiative for Climate and Development, and Mr. Mehran Haririan, Director of Research and Programs at Bourse and Bazaar Foundation. Ms. Rim Barhab, the floor is yours.
So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am very pleased to moderate the second session on case studies and success stories of GCC investment in green economic growth in the wider MENA. So in our earlier session, we examined the broader policy and financial framework shaping GCC investments in the region. So now we're trying to move from theory to practice. So the goal for this session is to take a look at what is already happening on the ground currently, what has worked, what lessons can be learned, and what experiences can be scaled or replicated. So as we saw in the previous session, the GCC countries have positioned themselves as a central actor in global clean energy transition. And increasingly, investment flows from these countries extend now to the wider MENA, where the demand for low-carbon solutions intersect with significant renewable resources from solar irradiations, wind corridors, as well as agricultural land with untapped potential. And what makes these investments particularly significant is their catalytic role. So it's not only about financial infrastructure, but it's also about shaping industrial ecosystem. And we mentioned some of them this morning and earlier. So from large-scale solar PV in North Africa to green hydrogen partnerships in Egypt and Morocco, and sustainable agribusiness and desalination solution in the Levant. So to unpack these experiences, we are fortunate to have with us three distinguished speakers. So each speaker will have approximately 10 minutes before opening the floor to a Q&A with the audience. So with no further ado, let me start by inviting Hisham Bouskri to share his perspectives and opening reflections.
Thank you. Thank you, Rim, and once again, thanks to the PCNS, IMAL, and the Rihla initiative for the opportunity to share with you our perspective. As we were speaking, I think earlier this morning, the GCC is a central actor in terms of investments around the world for green climate. When you look at the rankings around the world for sovereign wealth fund, 4 out of the 10 biggest sovereign wealth funds are coming from the GCC, the Emirates, Kuwait, Qatar, and Saudi. And the 5 out of the best performing sovereign wealth funds, out of the 12 best, 5 are coming also from the GCC. So these are sophisticated investors with a clear mandate not only for green investment and greening, but also for financial performance. And so for them to choose Morocco as a destination for investment, Morocco has to meet a certain number of criteria, both in terms of sustainable environment of investment, but also in terms of stability, economic, monetary, policy, politics as well. And so Morocco has been checking all of these boxes recently and even more than so before. When you look at Morocco as a destination for investment, what you see is it's the second most attractive investment destination in all of Africa. If you are a GCC fund and you're looking to locate your money somewhere else, you would like growth. This is really growth in the economy. Africa is probably one of the last frontier in terms of growth for the world. And so you need to locate your money somewhere where it will grow. And if you're looking at Africa, as I said, Morocco has been ranked the second most attractive. In North Africa, it's actually the most attractive investment opportunity.
If you add to that the scale, as I was mentioning, these are investment funds that are looking for big projects that can provide a sustainable return over a long term. These are not speculative funds. These are investment funds. And in that case, Morocco has been quite successful in promoting itself as a destination for investment in terms of infrastructure for longer term. So when you look at Morocco development plans, you have a clear development plan in terms of renewable energy and displacing fossil energy and replacing it by renewable energy. Each one of these projects is a 20-year project. When you look at the LGV, La Linea Grande Vitesse, or the high-speed train railway network now, it used to be just a single line, now it's a network. It's a 30-year investment project. When you're looking at desalination, same thing. So Morocco has been successful in promoting and putting in front of the investors long-term infrastructure projects, sometimes guaranteed by government guarantees, which provide the certainty for these investors to move forward. And you were talking about success stories. I think in 2024, the UAE became the biggest foreign investor in Morocco, surpassing France and Spain, which are the traditional investors in Morocco. The biggest energy provider with about 2,000 megawatts in Morocco is TAQA, which is an Emirati company that bought back the coal-fired power plants from Morocco, from the ONI when it was privatized. The biggest renewable energy provider in Morocco is Aqua Power, which is a Saudi company. So Aqua Power is managing Morocco's biggest solar multi-technology plant in Norwar-Zizat. It's about 580 megawatt. Just for a comparison of scale, we were talking about nuclear energy this morning. 580 megawatts is a medium-sized nuclear power plant. So we have the equivalent in Norwar-Zizat, including up to 7 hours of storage after the sunset, which is really quite advanced technologies. We're not talking about legacy type of investment, but really future-proof type of investment that we're done. And so Aqua Power is actually running that plant. It has been running. The first one, Norwar-Zizat one, has been running for 10 years. It was, I think, last couple of months, certified by the KfW as exceeding the design targets that were set for that plant. So it's not only our subjective evaluation of our projects, it's international, independent, objective evaluation of investment opportunity that are validating the Moroccan approach. The future projects, like, for example, the fact of having a battery with the photovoltaics, which is becoming, thanks to the investment from China, some of the most competitive energy. The Noor Middels plant will be Africa's biggest PV plus battery plant. There were 3 phases. One was won by Masdar, along with EDF and Green of Africa, and the other 2 were won by Aqua Power with Nareva. So what we see is a sustainable success story that validates convergence of interest. GCC countries have a great wealth production from oil. They are looking to diversify geographically. They are looking to diversify in terms of revenue, not by oil and gas sales. And Morocco is providing both of this: geographical diversification, sector diversification, stability for investments that allows them to actually continue investing repeatedly in Morocco. And some of the success stories have been running for over 15 years. So, for example, Etisalat of the Emirates bought the majority share in Etisalat al-Maghrib and reallocated all of its African subsidiaries to Etisalat al-Maghrib. So all of the African investments of Etisalat Emirates are running from Morocco. And this has been a partnership. That's really the term. I think the term partnership is easy to say, very difficult to live. It's like a marriage. It's up and downs and problems. But this partnership has been running for more than 15 years, and it was a win-win partnership. It allowed Maroc Telecom to become a leader in West Africa, at least. It allowed it to gain in terms of size. As you know, Morocco is about 36 million. It's kind of small compared to the level of investment that the GCC countries is bringing. But thanks to that consolidation and thanks to the free trade agreements that Morocco has signed, we can address about 1.3 billion consumers around the world. And this type of size is the right size for GCC sovereign wealth funds to invest. So I think the other part that we are seeing recently is a diversification away from these infrastructures. So we see a significant number of projects in real estate, where the Emirates in particular is a leading actor. And then we see that this partnership is becoming almost a marriage. The latest announcement back in the month of May is a $13 billion multi-sector agreement between Taqa from the Emirates, the Fonds Mohammed VI d'Investissement, and ONI and Nareva. They will create enough desalination plants for 1,000 million cubic meters per year. About 1,300 high voltage DC lines to bring the renewable energy from the south of Morocco to Casablanca. They are also planning to build water pumping stations in addition to renewable energy power plants, both wind and solar. And so all of this, and we had an interesting discussion with Ahmed Jamil, cannot be done if you're looking on the short term for a government that have a mandate of 4 years. The convergence of monarchies from Morocco and from the Middle East, from GCC countries, allows us to really look beyond the next election cycle. And for investment in infrastructure projects, this is absolutely key. We cannot afford to have a project that has cost billions of dollars completely change course after a few years. We see even Morocco compared to other countries such as Egypt, the Moroccan currency has been stable for the past 20, 30 years. The Egyptian currency has been devaluated by half not too far ago. And so what does that mean? It means that you're taking investment projects that could have been profitable over 5, 10 years, and you're making them money losing pretty fast. And so a number of success stories that build on the strength of both countries, a convergence of interest, a strategic alignment, and I think it's really a success story. I don't know if it can be duplicated easily elsewhere, but as a Moroccan, we're sure very happy to see this success continue.
Thank you very much, Hisham, for sharing with us these success stories. So I'd now like to turn to Iskander. Maybe you can share with us your view from insights from your work on this issue.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rim, for your insights, and to my distinguished colleague Hisham. I think it's an important discussion we're having to try to capture some of these insights around success stories and where things are working. As Hisham said, in some instances it may be replicable, in other cases it may be more difficult, more challenging, impossible in the near term, but maybe possible in the longer term. Nevertheless, we I think are called to have this conversation. I think looking beyond specific examples, first of all, I mean, just to say, it makes perfect sense that you would have a close investment from Gulf. In this case, we're looking especially at sovereign wealth funds, but not only, and their associated economic actors. In financial theory, there's this thing called the proximity bias. And the assumption here is that, this is building on the discussion that we were having about risk and the perception of risk, is that there's, I think, when you have countries that are maybe closer geographically or maybe even linguistically, also institutionally, that leads to a sense that things are less risky than they might otherwise be perceived by people or investors who are more distant, coming from, say, London or New York or something. And I think this gives rise to a number of interesting success stories around the region, and I think maybe it'll be someone's job to do a full enumeration of all of the examples that exist and the different forms that they have taken. I mean, I think we've discussed the flagship examples in Morocco, which I think clearly represent one of the leading examples in the region. There are other interesting examples to be looked at. Obviously, I think the Egyptian context and the role of Masdar there is one that has been mentioned. I understand the investors from Oman have also been attempting to play a role in the Algerian context. We can, I think, identify a number of cases. Obviously, some are working better than others, and maybe some are at higher scales than others. Some are longer standing than others. So yeah, I mean, I think the long-standing example in the Moroccan context, we have the role played by Aqua Power, of course. That's a key arm of the Saudi Public Investment Fund, PIF, which I think may have been mentioned earlier. And of course, the flagship example mentioned by Hisham of the sizable multi-sectoral water, energy, UAE, Morocco, what's called the mega deal. And I think we'll probably keep coming back to that example as maybe even the premier example from the region, which we'll hopefully capture in the analysis coming out of this event. I think obviously that didn't come from nowhere, as we've said, and I think what we need to do is kind of draw out these enabling factors that allowed for it to come to being. And I think the previous panel alluded to some of the problematics that the challenges, the hurdles that investors face in this regional context, and others have alluded to the relative strong points that have allowed for some of the success stories to emerge. Obviously, in the Moroccan context, we have a strong fraternal relationship between the leadership of the two countries, Morocco and the UAE. A lot of work was put into the deal. It didn't just come from nowhere. There was the big state visit, if people recall, in 2023, essentially on the margins of COP28, where you had not just His Majesty King Mohammed VI, but a whole retinue of the ministers, and there was all sorts of signing of memoranda, and that was, I guess, the beginning of the conversations that culminated in the deal that was signed earlier this year. But of course, it's not just that as well. You can go even further back and look at some of the macroeconomic and indeed fiscal and monetary qualities that make Morocco an exceptional place to invest. I mean, the converse of the issues that have been raised about instability and risk premia. Obviously, that's why Morocco has found a comparative advantage in being able to present a relatively stable investment environment, and that takes a number of forms. Yes, it's about currency. Yes, it's about the fiscal sustainability of the country as a sovereign debtor, and in terms of its creditworthiness and that of its institutions. We've, I think, spoken about the role played by the state in providing guarantees. In some cases, it provides even subsidies of various forms. So a lot of work went into the development of Morocco's investment charter, the Charte d'Investissement. And it's quite thoughtful in the sense that the subsidies are allocated in a way that privileges the most strategic investments where they're needed. So it's not just foreign direct investment for the sake of foreign direct investment. It's privileging higher subsidies for the disadvantaged, non-industrialized regions of Morocco. There's weightings and scorings that take into account factors like gender. and also privileging of what's identified there as being the sort of sectors, industries, job-creating industries of the future. You know, obviously this includes, you know, things in the digital and AI spaces, but very much in this future green economy as well. I guess maybe it would be remiss of me not to mention a few words of caution, maybe with some of these experiences, of course. Water desalination is a key solution for tackling water scarcity in a country like Morocco, particularly with consumption in the coastal cities and agriculture along the coasts. But it's no remedy for some of the issues that we may be facing in terms of depletion of the water tables. So, you know, structural issues obviously require structural solutions. And, you know, we have to, I think, be continually strategic about how we approach some of these challenges, and, you know, seek to go further in terms of our solutions. I think also to note, I mean, some of these investment choices, some of them are more far-sighted than others. Some may have greater financial risks in the long term. I think a lot of work has been done about the possibility of stranded asset risk in the context of investments in thermal, fossil-fired power generation. Obviously, as Morocco, we're an importer, but I think, you know, there's the recognition that, you know, for Morocco, I think, yeah, we're moving away from coal. Gas continues to play a role. How much, I think remains to be seen. Obviously, as has been mentioned, the advent of renewables, photovoltaics combined with storage edges into not just the role of gas in providing what used to be called baseload power generation, but now also the kind of peaking plant functionality as well for grid balancing. I mean, I think we also have to be mindful of some of the other issues that I think the region has faced in terms of some of the climate-related investments around the carbon markets that involve acquisition of land. Those have presented some issues, particularly in the East African context, but and dispossession there. But I think potentially we have to be wary of that as well. I think that also potentially applies in the context of renewable energy deployment. We have to obviously ensure that those are done in a socially sustainable manner. But on the whole, I think we have some really important things to celebrate in terms of what's working well. In terms of the huge amounts of money, as has been said, we're talking tens of billions of US dollars, hundreds of billions of Moroccan dirham. This is in the Moroccan context, and I think, you know, if you look across the region, a country like Egypt is sometimes pointed to as a success story, but there I think sometimes you have FDI that's happening in a very different way. You have a lot of privatization that has been pushed because of maybe fiscal challenges, pressure from the IMF, currency issues with their foreign currency reserves. So you know, some of these stories look very, very different in different places. I think my mic is out, and maybe that's a sign for me to wrap up. Well, I think I'm more or less at time.
Mine doesn't work as well, so you better just.
But in the interest of time,
yeah,
maybe
okay.
I'll move on.
So can we have hello?
Hello. Test 1 2 3. Hello.
You only get one microphone. That's good enough for you.
So maybe I think it's working again.
Hello?
Yes.
So thank you, Iskander, for sharing with us these success stories. So before we're having another tech issue, I'll bring Mehran to share with us his insights about these success stories and what can we learn from them.
So whatever I have learned about all of this is because of the Rihla initiative. So I'll explain some of the things we've come across in the past few months with the Policy Council and with the Rihla handbook that I mentioned earlier. I really encourage you all to read that. In the handbook, for example, Egypt is the front runner, but as Iskander just mentioned, it's not for the same good reasons as Morocco is the second in that list, let's say. So Egypt is receiving large sums of investments from the Gulf, particularly from Saudi Arabia, but then also from the UAE as well. But it's mostly for geopolitical reasons than for the, let's say, welcoming environment for investment. The fraternity between the countries, between Saudi Arabia and Egypt, between UAE and Egypt, is a consideration to have. But the same also applies with Morocco. As was mentioned this morning, the relationship between between Saudi Arabia and Morocco and UAE and Morocco, for example, is top-notch in the sense of both at the political level, but also at the financial level, economic level, and economic relationships. But Morocco itself, I think one of the few considerations in terms of its success as a success story is its regulatory clarity and having a welcoming environment for GCC investors, both private and public. The way Aqua Power, Masdar, Mubadala, Taga are structured is technically they're state-backed, but at the same time, some of their work also relates to the private sector in the sense of the nature of their work. Within this context, I would say we can also look at other countries in the region, such as Tunisia, Iraq, and Lebanon, and Jordan, who are also receiving very large sums of investments from the Gulf states. But particularly, initially, we actually referred to Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and UAE as the Gulf 3, and that's because of the level of investments and the level of work that they're actually involved in climate financing. But we changed that for the public version of the handbook, actually, and we wanted to have a more GCC-wide approach in the context of really looking at regional cooperation, both within the targeted regions, but also amongst the GCC players themselves. So that's also something to consider. And one of the, again, contributing factors to a success story would really be having a nexus approach in terms of a water, energy, and food nexus, and how these investments really tackle the different facets of the needs, let's say, of the targeted country, but also how they also contribute to the GCC's own diversification efforts. In terms of sectors, for example, obviously renewables such as solar and wind are really leading the way, but there's also green hydrogen to consider, but also desalination and renewable transmission. In that context, we're also having agriculture.
Test.
Hello.
Hello.
Maybe there's a timer for these.
You didn't go on as long as me.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Hello.
Hello. Can someone assist with the mic issues?
Hello.
Hello. Maybe you can just speak a little bit louder.
Sure. So the agriculture is something that is also very important, let's say, for both the region and within the context of food security for the Gulf states as well. So the way that contributes in terms of the investments is something to consider as well. So in generally speaking, like the challenge is not really just about mobilizing capital, but about ensuring that the cooperation between the Gulf states and the wider MENA region creates a framework for predictable, transparent, and transferable and transformative, let's say, initiatives. And Landmark projects in the region show Gulf MENA partnerships can work, but scaling them requires more than just money. It's about aligning systems, policies, and institutions, and that's something that Morocco has been really successful in. Innovative financing is also something that is very crucial here, from blended models to Islamic finance principles, which really unlocked a new wave of investments and possibilities, let's say, in terms of collaboration amongst different organizations, different institutions, different funding bodies. At the same time, adaptation is also very important. And as was discussed in the previous session, it can't just be an afterthought. It's really an important component for this transition to succeed. So I'll pause here.
Thank you very much. I think that we have a few moments for a Q&A session with the audience, so I suggest we gather some questions and then do multiple rounds. So if you have a question, please raise your hand. And don't be shy. I know it's the end of the day and we might be a little bit tired. Yes, of course.
Actually, this point on blended finance is something that we skipped in the previous session, and I think it's important if I could ask from Hisham and Iskandar how you view this in terms of the Islamic component of it, with sukuk, with green bonds or whatnot. How important do you think that is in terms of being an innovative format of, let's say, funding or investment within the Moroccan context, but also generally speaking?
So I think when you look at climate finance or finance for energy transition in Morocco, you have really two big phases. From Morocco, solar plants started back in 2009, and between 2009 and 2018, renewable energy was not as competitive as it is today. So during that period, the government guaranteed any forms of loans that went to a renewable energy project. And that added up to a point where the government saw that it was threatening its sovereign grade in terms of lending. And so by then, the renewable energy projects were competitive on a commercial financing purpose. So Morocco emitted the first green bonds for a couple of solar plants in Laayoune and Boujdour that were fully subscribed to by Moroccan banks, but they were backed by the government guarantee as well. From there, we have moved into project finance, which means that the lending goes to the developer who will be investing and not to the Moroccan government who makes the money available to the developer. A very interesting aspect looking at how the price curve on PV and batteries have evolved and wind has evolved over the past few years. For example, Midelt, which is a big complex in the center of Morocco that will be having 3 phases, PV plus battery energy storage in 3 phases, three plants. One of the plants were government-backed. You had the government's guarantee for the loan from KfW, the European Investment Bank, and others. And the other one was purely project-based, so the developer needed to find his own financing in the commercial. And the price difference in terms of levelized cost of energy was very small. One was 0.34 US cent per kilowatt hour. That's the government guaranteed loan. And the other one was about 0.36. So you only get these types of differences if you have a very stable country that actually inspires trust to lenders. You only get that if you have developers of the scale of Aqua Power, Masdar, and others. You cannot loan these types of amounts to the project. Each one of these projects is a few $100 million of investment. And so moving away from government-backed financing, whether it's through sukuks, bonds, loans, mezzanine loans, blended finance, to fully project finance, is actually freeing a lot of the available public capital to go to other areas where investment is needed. So I think now it becomes really a market competition between green financing, blended financing, sukuks, etc. It's whoever has appetite for risk what is the return on investment that you are expecting over the term of the project, and what is the maturity of the technology you're investing in. So what we are seeing is that now companies are going to financial institutions trying to raise money for their own projects, and the government is moving away. And Morocco has never or has always been technology agnostic. Now we are finance source agnostic. So whoever is providing the most value for the country is welcome to step in. The good news is that many of these loans are coming from Moroccan banks. Believe it or not, there is a surplus of liquidity within the Moroccan banks. And now it has a means of being invested in infrastructure projects. So I think things are changing overall, and what we will see is that companies, whether they are structuring their loans on the project or whether it's a corporate loan based on their own balance sheet, will start to make a difference. And we will see fewer and fewer small companies being able to develop projects. It's only bigger companies, and projects are ultimately more competitive the bigger they are. So it's a route, or it's weeding out the smaller players for the larger ones.
Iskandar, do you want to react?
Maybe just a few thoughts, because I mean, this is very important, right? Because it's blended finance, combining different types of finance is about how you can make things happen that would not otherwise happen. Yeah. And here it's interesting to look at the different sort of commercial viability of some of these things that you as a country want to finance. And I think previously in the discussion we talked about how some of these things are revenue generating, like renewable energy projects. In the mitigation space, you have that, although mitigation is not just about that. It's other things too, some of which may not be immediately revenue generating. Others might be more about cost saving, but you can think about structuring it in innovative ways. On the resilience and adaptation side, it's more difficult, right? The example of water desalination, that's maybe perhaps an exception in some ways, because that's about actually producing water, so it can be revenue generating. You know, you can have contracts for suppliers. The issue, and we have colleagues in the audience, I think, from our Ministry of Finance who can attest to this. But you know, there's some projects that would not be happening if it wasn't for blending of finance, because I mean, at least for on the adaptation side, where you have big projects where the state has to play the leading role because markets are unable to do these kinds of infrastructure projects on their own. Where if it wasn't for a blending of lower cost international climate finance, the deals would not have happened. Sometimes even the MDB, the Multilateral Development Bank lending can be too expensive for some of these projects in the water sector. I think the renewable energy generation space, it's interesting to think about how the market is evolving, because what we have seen, maybe even in countries that have higher penetration of renewables than Morocco, is that the sort of returns that you can expect will diminish as there's more renewables on the market connected to the grid. There's maybe you know, additional profitability to be get by adding in storage with existing renewable energy installations. Although ultimately even that, you know, gets crowded. So I think, you know, thinking about the financial solutions is important. What's also important is thinking about the sort of supply side of capital, and how you have, you know, in a country like Morocco, but others across the global south as well. Sometimes you have institutional investors that represent our asset owners, pension funds and insurers, and they're looking to invest. but they don't find something that is going to enable them to be competitive as fiduciaries to provide return for the people that are giving them their money to manage. So yeah, when we look at sovereign wealth funds, it's interesting. They have a role to play in cultivating that project pipeline. They can actually do that, go in early, and then maybe take also part of the proceeds later for providing that support. They, in general, can be characterized as being more patient capital. So that's where they have a value add to play, which makes them, although they're seeking, profit and investment, in some cases, they might not be as rigid as some of the institutional investors. So important to look at holistically at the options on the table, what they can do and what they can't do.
Thank you very much, Iskandar. I may have a question for you, Mehran. And you've been mentioning this handbook that you have been working on, and you discussed some of the case studies, and you mentioned some countries, Morocco, Egypt, Tunisia. So I was wondering if you can share with us collectively one or two key lessons that you have learned from, the studies and the surveys made in this handbook.
I'll answer it within the context of something I wanted to discuss also. So I've been thinking about this all day today since the roundtable we had early morning. I think one of the success factors for Morocco, and again, if you want to look at other countries in the 4 regions that we're looking at, the top country in each of these regions, what they have in common is actually looking at the regional bloc. And that's something that I think is very important into the consideration. Obviously, within the context of Morocco, within the context of North Africa, let's say there's not much regional integration happening. But at the same time, Morocco is establishing itself as a hub. And that hub, as a finance hub, as a green energy hub, as a renewable energy hub, however you want to frame it, is important in the context of attracting investments, but by not just the GCC states within the considerations that I mentioned, whether it's the fraternity or whether it's the welcomingness of the country in terms of attracting investments, but it's also the push and the urge that the country feels in terms of its geographical position. For example, Morocco has both the consideration of the sub-Saharan Africa, but also with Europe. And that itself creates a new framework for cooperation and, let's say, investments in terms of looking at the next generation of its outputs, right? So how that can contribute to European interest, Gulf interest, or the African interest is something that positions it as a unique player within this context.
Thank you very much. So just let me see if there is a question from the audience. Oh, yeah, I see a question there.
First of all, thank you, Rihla Initiative, for the invitation. I'm a BBA student, and I think my question is kind of far, but within the concept. You mentioned renewables, like mega project, like renewables, what do we call it, desalination. And my question is, like, as young students, aspiring economists, for example, how can we be part of these projects, like not just as workers, but why not innovators, like bringing ideas together for maybe a sustainable future? Thank you.
The way you should look at energy and water is not as utilities, but as enablers to economic development. So, for example, the first desalination plant that was built in Morocco, in Agadir, was the first one that was dedicated to agriculture and to the city-owned water consumption, drinking water consumption. It was half-half. And it was the first time that farmers were going to start paying for the cubic meter of water. So how does that change the nature of agriculture they are conducting? How does that impact the price of the produce on the Moroccan market? If they are doing export, how is that changing and challenging the history? Initially, that cubic meter from that desalination plant was approximately $1 per cubic meter, 10 dirhams. It was sold initially to the farmers at 5 dirhams, half price. So the Moroccan government, you and I, were subsidizing half of the price of the cubic meter for these farmers who basically were exporting. The next biggest desalination plant in Casablanca was awarded at 4.3 dirhams per cubic meter. So that completely changes the dynamic, takes away the subsidy, allows this project to scale up. So as economists, looking at how renewable energy, which is much cheaper than fossil fuels, how can it re-dynamize or recreate new industries, how this desalinated water could create new types of agriculture, how is it impacting the communities. There is a great new challenge that is facing Morocco, that is green hydrogen. And in order to do green hydrogen, you need to build highly competitive renewable energy, highly competitive desalinated water, and infrastructure in regions where there is very little. Gilmim, Wadnoun, Boujdour, Laayoune, Dakhla, and others. FTSAT and other places. So there will be almost free desalinated water made by the hundreds of thousands of cubic meters in these areas. Can we create new economies in there? What is the value chain? Who is benefiting from these types of things? So all of these, I assumed BBA is a Bachelor in Business Administration. Okay. So looking at the value chain, understanding how these fundamental changes to the Moroccan energy and water sector could bring about a different type of setup, different ecosystems. Who are the players? How do we share the added value between the communities? How we create competitive added value is really something that could be of interest.
Yes, Mehran, do you want to react?
I actually thank you very much for your question, because I was looking now at the MENA policy brief that we published a few days ago, and in the recommendation section, I'm actually going to read it now. The first recommendation says center communities and knowledge, and by that they actually mean leverage the rich local knowledge base of researchers and practitioners to co-create regionally rooted solutions. There's many reasons why this is the number one recommendations, and I'm going to emphasize the fact that the reports were published basically by gathering the insights from the policy council members. And the way we frame the policy council members, which for the MENA includes Lydia, for example, and for the Gulf Committee, the way that we work with the Gulf Committee is that the 12 members are divided into the 4 regions. So basically three Gulf Committee members are working for MENA specifically, and 2 of them are Jessica and Ahmed, who you met earlier. And I'm saying this because it's important. It's very important to be able to tap into the local knowledge capacities of the countries under question. And I really hope that you would be able to contribute to this innovation as well.
Thank you very much. So if there is no other question, I think that we can close the panel. So again, thank you very much for our distinguished speakers for your insight. And we hope to continue the discussion on this topic in future convenings. Thank you very much.
Dear participants, esteemed speakers and moderators, the session has now come to an end. We sincerely thank you for your valuable contributions, and we look forward to welcoming you again soon. Thank you.